Now, President Trump's handling of the coronavirus is certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue in the presidential campaign. But other issues count with certain voters. Trump's unstinting support for Israel, his moving of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, now his support for West Bank annexation certainly plays well among his evangelical base. But what about Jewish voters? Well, in a recent call with Jewish donors, Joe Biden reportedly stressed a different approach he will take regarding Israeli peace and security issues, seeing them as an electoral plus for him. But is he right about that? Well, joining us now is Matthew Brooks. He is the executive director of the Republican Jewish Coalition, and he joins us from Washington TV. Thank you for joining us, Matt. Well, let's talk about that. Joe Biden, reportedly on the call, sounded confident he could differentiate from President Trump and still do well among the Jewish voters. What is your feeling going into the election about President Trump and his support in that area?
Here's the thing, Caleb. First of all, thank you for having me on your show today. The reality is that for those voters in the Jewish community who make their decisions and are deeply concerned about the direction of the U.S.-Israel relationship, there is no question in my mind that President Trump, who is the most pro-Israel president ever in history, is going to stand in sharp contrast to that of Joe Biden, not just for the reasons that you talked about, which are important and meaningful, the moving of the embassy, recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, the support for the annexation of the Golan Heights, ending the Iran deal, changing the culture of the United Nations, in which Israel was a pariah state attacked by all the member nations, to one that the United States stands by Israel and defends Israel in the UN. You know, all of those things make it clear, and as does the fact that there's bipartisan support in Israel. You've listened to Israeli leaders from Benny Gantz to Bibi Netanyahu and to others on the left and on the far right, all praising President Trump as the most pro-Israel president in history. So my message to the Jewish community and the Jewish voters, if you liked the 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration in which Israel was singled out at the United Nations, in which the administration actively worked to create daylight between the United States and Israel, supported a disastrous Iran deal, and further delegitimized Israel in the international community, then you will love Joe Biden. But I think that the Jewish community is smart enough to know that the real friend in this race is President Donald Trump.
But Matt, realistically, do you see that in any way helping President Trump increase his percentage of the Jewish vote, move beyond that sort of 30 to 35% ceiling we've seen on Republican presidential candidates, given the differences on domestic issues that the president has with with many American Jewish voters?
Here's what I do know, Caleb, is that, and I guarantee this, that President Trump will do better among Jewish voters in 2020 than he did on 2016. I think it's way too early to predict and to take a guesstimate at what that number will be in the range, but I do know it'll be higher than what he got, which was 24% in 2016. The Republican Jewish Coalition is committed to this effort. We plan on spending $10 million in what will be the largest outreach effort ever undertaken in the Jewish community, focusing on the critical battleground states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, for instance, to maximize the support that the president gets in the Jewish community. And I am confident that because of his position on Israel, I am confident that also because of domestic issues, he will do better. I think that this is in many ways going to be a referendum on this election.
Well, can you explain that? How on domestic issues, when many of his positions go against those, a Jewish community that is sort of center or liberal in many cases?
No, I agree with you. The community it tends to be center left. But my point is, as you led into with the intro to our segment, is I think this is going to be a referendum ultimately in the macro sense of the big theme of this campaign is going to be who is best to lead America out of this crisis that we're in, who's best to create and bring back the jobs and get the economy moving and the stock market rising. And if one thing Donald Trump has is he has 3 years of an incredible, and I would argue historic record of economic growth and job creation, that I think when the American people really think about who they think is best to get America back again, there's no question. And I think that holds true in the Jewish community because, like the rest of the country, we're impacted by this as well. And we want to get the job backs and the businesses running and America open and our economy back to where it was.
Matt, let me ask you, there are certainly individuals within the Democratic Party, I'm thinking particularly of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, whose rhetoric have disturbed even people on the sort of in the center-left side of the or center-liberal side, say, of the American Jewish community. But in the Republican Party, you do have also your individuals like Representative Steve King of Iowa, who have made some problematic statements for the American Jewish community. How are you, as the Republican Jewish Coalition, relating to an individual like Representative King?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because I think it stands in stark contrast to how the leading Democrats are handling the problems that they have within their own party. By contrast, we have made very clear that the Republican Jewish Coalition not only will not support Steve King, we've made very clear that we find his views to be outside of the mainstream of the Republican Party and inconsistent with the values of the RJC, the Jewish community, and the GOP. And as a result, we have actively engaged in supporting his opponent in his primary, which is next week on the June the 2nd. So we are actively working to defeat Steve King, whereas
how likely, Matt, how likely is that? Briefly, if you could answer.
I'm confident, actually. I think Randy Fenstra, who we're supporting, is a very strong candidate, and the latest polls in the district actually have him up a couple percentage points. So we are very guardedly optimistic that we will be able to defeat King and take a great future leader like Randy Fenstra to Congress. All
right. Matthew Brooks of the Republican Jewish Coalition, thank you for joining us on i24 News.